I'm often challenged by this words of Jesus in Luke chapter 22. It was the Last Supper, and these words he says, Luke 22. Verse 15, I have earnestly desired to have this Passover with you before I suffer. And in the Message translation it says, you all have no idea how much I have looked forward to being with you. You have no idea. Imagine Jesus speaking to people who all going to forsake him. They're all going to run away from him in the Garden of Gethsemane. One of them is going to betray him. Another one is going to deny him 3 times. But he overlooks all that and he says, you have no idea how much I look forward to being with you because God has chosen you. And I want to say that to you, dear brothers. There may be a few crooks here and there. Okay. There was a crook in Jesus' church too, so I'm not disturbed if there are a few in our midst who are not straightforward. It doesn't disturb me. But I believe that most of you are sincere, and I believe you must recognize that God has chosen you. And therefore our attitude towards fellowship must always be, you have no idea. I can say that. Honestly, I can say it. I'm not just repeating the words of Jesus. You have no idea how much I look forward to fellowship with God's people. For 40 years, this has been my family. I have not known any family like this. And you have no idea how much I look forward to always being with you all, even in the midst of all my travels. And he goes on to say to them, they had a dispute there in verse 24 as to who's going to be the greatest. See, these were not a bunch of perfect people, those 12 people sitting there, and neither are you, neither am I. They had their imperfections, and Jesus was not blind to it. Why was he eagerly looking forward to a whole lot of people who were arguing about who's the greatest? He says, yeah, they have a little weakness, but they'll get over it. He knew they'll get over it, and they did get over it. But if he had kept on condemning them, they would have got discouraged and left him. Don't condemn and discourage your children. Encourage them. Encourage one another. It's the greatest ministry you can fulfill. He says, there was a dispute among them, among who's to be the greatest. And what does he tell these people? He says in verse 28, you are those who have stood by me in my trials. And my Father has granted me a kingdom, and I'm going to give a kingdom to you as well. What a word to say. You have stood by me. In their moment of weakness a little later, one of them denied and all of them ran away. But in all those 3.5 years, when Jesus was called Prince of Devils, they stood by him. When they tried to kill Jesus, these 12 people stood by him. That's what he's saying. You guys are not perfect, but you've stood by me. I think of brothers who have been with us almost from the beginning, some 25, 30 years. And if you know the way we have been attacked and ridiculed and mocked and called all types of bad names through all these 40 years, even now, I have to say, you stood true to CFC and stood true to what we have stood for. You have been faithful. You have not run away and gone away somewhere else. So I can say that. You stood by me in the trials, and God's going to give us a kingdom. And even to someone like Peter, who was going to fail and deny him, he says to him in verse 31, Simon, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, and I know you'll fail, but I'm praying for you. See, that was the reason why he had faith for them. He prayed for them. And that's one thing that any of us can do for one another. When you see somebody fainting or discouraged. I prayed for you, and he says, when you have turned again, I know you will turn again, Peter. Can you imagine how much those words encouraged him when he finally fell? When you turn again, strengthen your brothers. Imagine telling that to a man who's going to deny Jesus 3 times. Oh, I know it's going to happen. But that's not the end of the story, Peter. God's going to turn you around. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. God wants you to be one who will strengthen your brothers and sisters. So we want to be men and women in the coming days who strengthen our brothers and sisters, because we are going into difficult times in this country. And not only this country, it's difficult to be a Christian, like in the Living Bible, 2 Timothy 3 verse 1 says, in the last days it will be difficult to be a Christian. Everywhere. In one country it may be one way, in another country it may be in another way.